it's not limited to college campuses. I don't mean to pick on the college students here. Young people also increasingly say, like a third of them will say, that it's not very important to live in a democracy. And so I do think, and Tocqueville did talk about this. He says, well, what happens when we lose these intermediate associations, these connections that bind us, whether it's our bowling league, our church, the Kiwanis Club, whatever. And he said that if we become so self-absorbed and less connected with one another, we might become like a flock of timid sheep looking for a shepherd to lead us wherever we would go. And he said that's the end of America. That was, in his mind, the end of the American exceptionalism. And I'm an incorrigible optimist. I don't think we're there yet. But I do think it's worth asking, did Tocqueville does he have a finger on something?
Well, just one more beat on this, because it's so important. Tocqueville says that when we lose intermediate associations, we risk losing the republic, and the solution is two things: self-interest properly understood, which is self-mastery and civic virtue, and then the spirit of religion. Thoughts?
I'm going to let you take this one, Justice.
Yeah. I do think when we isolate ourselves, we are less apt to see those with whom we disagree as equal and as intelligent and as thoughtful, right? And the whole point of democracy, right, is to get us all in a room and have us debate rather than fight, and trust that the best solution will emerge, right? The wisdom of the masses was kind of the idea. Francis Galton in England went to a county fair, and he noticed there was a guess the weight of the ox contest. And he noted down all of the guesses by the experts, and then he averaged up all the guesses by the ordinary people. And guess which was closest? The average of the ordinary people. And I do think that's how Madison tried to set up our legislative process, to bring to bear the wisdom of the masses, to get us all in a room. We have to debate, we have to disagree in order to get the best ideas and distill them down and make law. And when we can't do that anymore, we look for somebody to answer those questions for us.
The great power of the book is the stories, and you illustrate these ideas by telling them, and let's begin with Sally and John Yates.
Do you want to tell this one?
No, you tell us one.
Okay. So John and Sandra were high school sweethearts, and John loved fishing. And he wanted to make a life as a commercial fisherman, so they moved down to Florida also to be near family. And John works his way up from just deckhand to the captain of his own small crew. He's out one day for red grouper, and he's actually been out for a while. How long, Janie?
Oh, a good 2 weeks, I think.
2 weeks, maybe. Okay. He's got a lot of fish. And a young man comes up, and he's a state official, but he's cross-deputized with NOAA, a federal agency. And he says, I'd like to measure your fish to make sure they're the right size. And regulations at that time, federal regulations, said they have to be 20 inches. And John says, I got an awful lot of fish in the hold. And he says, I've got all day. So he brings out a stick to measure the red grouper, and there's immediately a little disagreement because red grouper apparently have a lower jaw that sticks out. And this fellow, according to John, was measuring from the nose to the tail, not from the lower jaw. And so his measurements were a little short, John thought. The ancient disagreed. Oh, okay. He finds, by way of his measurements, 72 red grouper that are under 20 inches. All of them are over 18 3/4 inches. That's important for him. You'll see in a minute. Well, he says, segregate those fish and I'll deal with you when you get back to dock. John says, okay, I'm going to get a citation, whatever, I'll deal with it. Gets back to dock a couple of days later. The fellow says, I'd like to measure those fish in the crate again. He measures them, but this time he only finds 69 that are under 20 inches. And he's very suspicious. Strangely, though, he does nothing. John hears nothing about this incident for 3 years. 3 years later, agents surround his house, armed, the whole thing. His wife's doing laundry. They say, where's John? She has no idea what this is about. And John's out crabbing, it turns out. But he comes straight in. They arrest him, don't tell him what's going on. They take him 2 hours to Fort Myers and book him, and they're charging him with violating the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Now, the lawyers in the room are laughing because the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, folks, was adopted after the Enron accounting scandal, and it was dealt to address accountants who destroyed documents when a federal investigation was impending. And the law reads something like this: thou shalt not intentionally destroy, mangle, blah, 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 records, financial documents, accounting spreadsheets, yada, yada, and other tangible objects when a federal investigation is impending. You guessed it. Reg Grouper are the other tangible objects. Okay. Sarbanes-Oxley charge carries up to 20 years in federal prison. It's a federal felony. And John says, this is crazy. I'm not guilty of Sarbanes-Oxley Act. I'm happy to pay a citation, maybe not, and maybe he wants to talk about the Jaws, whatever. And so he proceeds to trial. Most people today can't afford to proceed to trial for a variety of reasons I'm sure we'll get into. Over 97% of federal criminal cases plea out. He takes it to trial. Very brave, courageous move. By the time he goes to trial, guess what the size limit for Reg Grouper is? 18 inches. 18 inches. And the federal government still spends money to pursue John. He loses. He says, can I spend my prison term, can I start it after Christmas? The judge happily only sentences him to 30 days. But he's got to wear the bracelet for a while, the DNA, the registration, all that stuff for years. And then, of course, no. So he spends Christmas in jail. He wanted to spend Christmas at home because he was raising, with his wife, 2 of their grandchildren. He appeals. He loses again. He takes it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. The case is taken by the Supreme Court of the United States, and he wins by 1 vote, 5-4. Justice Ginsburg, including Justice Alito, say other tangible objects have to be sort of like the ones that are listed. You can't just say everything. I mean, what isn't a tangible object? Pluto's a tangible object. 4 dissenters, including Justice Kagan and Justice Scalia, disagree. They have a very good argument. Both sides have a good legal argument. The divide isn't along ideological lines. He wins all the vindication a man can win in our legal system today. But what's happened to him? He's lost his fishing boat. He's lost his ability to support his family. They're now dependent on his wife's job, and they live in a trailer having lost their home. That's what I wanted to talk about in this book. One can make a very good legal argument either way. But what are we doing with laws that capture somebody like John and make him a federal felon? There's a little footnote to the end of the story. Afterwards, after Justice Ginsburg wrote the majority opinion, the Department of Commerce, which oversees NOAA, decided to do an internal investigation. An inspector general did a report. Wanted to see if they're being maybe too tough on commercial fishermen, throwing Sarbanes-Oxley at them. Found, yeah, maybe they are. But he also told Congress that he had difficulty conducting his investigation because one of the agents involved destroyed all of his documents. And to the best of our knowledge, no Sarbanes-Oxley charges were brought against him.
Janie, that story appears in the first chapter, an introduction to Law's Empire, and you talk about how difficult it is to hold federal officials accountable. Many of these regulations are passed through executive order, and some can't be challenged at all. What are the broader points you're trying to bring out in the introduction?
I think our introduction was really trying to briefly sort of summarize some of the issues that are that we're facing today in the country. And one of the things that struck me was just in part through this story that, it used to be, take our federal criminal laws. It used to be that without reading anything, you would sort of just know what was prohibited criminally, because it was like, do not kill, do not steal, do not, things of that sort, right? Do not kidnap, and things that you were sort of taught or should have been taught from a young age. And our laws, take just our criminal laws, have exploded so much that no one really knows anymore what is in our criminal laws. No one really knows what is in our civil laws. And it's, Sandra was actually a legal assistant at one point, and she had never heard of Sarbanes-Oxley. And we're bringing to bear laws against individuals that not only did they not know about, but no reasonable person could have expected them to know about. And I think it's sort of that disconnect of what we think of nowadays as fair notice or just flat sort of fairness that has been lost. But one follow-up to the Yates story, I think it's in many ways a very depressing and sad story, but there's a little bit of optimism in it, in the sense that, Sandra Yates, who really in a way is the heroine of the book, she was the one who at each step said, we're not going to give up, right? At one point, after John had served his time in prison, so it was before they had filed a cert petition before the Supreme Court, he wanted to end. He'd already served him time in prison. There was nothing more that he could personally gain from continuing on. And she said, no, we have to sort of continue on for all the other fishermen. And so what I do like is that even in these sort of sad stories, we did find a lot of optimism and sort of lights of hope.
And the courage.
And courage.
Incredible courage of somebody like Sandra Yates, who says, no, we're going to stand up to this, and we're going to pursue it all the way. And I got to tell you, she's still a little bit angry she didn't get more than 5 votes.
Well, that's the power of following up on the court record with the interviews, and it really helps bring the stories to life. The second chapter is Far From Home, and you also tell a really important historical story about Connie Buck and eugenics. Why'd you choose to tell that story?
Well, everybody knows the story of Buck versus Bell, or if you don't, you'll read it in the book. But if you care to. The point of that chapter, though, is we start looking at, okay, how has this happened? What exactly has happened? And there are 2 moves that I think, in general, the book describes. The first is the movement of a lot of our legislative authority, our lawmaking, from the local level, where you can participate. There are thousands upon thousands, I can't remember how many, tens of thousands of elected jobs in this country.
Yeah, over 50,000.
Over 50,000, right. And you can volunteer and you can participate. Our lawmaking used to be primarily at the state level, and it has really moved up to the federal level. And then the other piece we document is how it's changed within the federal level, and I'm sure we'll get to that. Now, the move from the states to the federal government in our lawmaking has certain virtues, right? Uniformity, good, right? Good. Everybody knows what the rule is, and they can cross states. And that actually facilitates commerce, too, right? Race to the bottom. You prevent races to the bottom by states, right? You get rid of discriminatory and inappropriate laws that are popular maybe in one section of the country or another. So there's a lot of good things about nationalization, but is there a cost when you take things away from people? Possibly. And the story of Carrie Buck, just in brief, is that story, right? There was, in the early part of the last century, a move toward eugenics and a belief that it was okay to sterilize people who were considered in that time as feeble-minded. And Carrie Buck was one such person. That never really took off in America the way it did later in Nazi Germany. It happened in some states, but not in others. Others recognized this is not a place we should be. And even in the states where it took off, it often got rejected by governors who vetoed the legislation or by judges in state courts who stopped it under state constitutional law and said no. Okay. Then Carrie Buck was a test case, as it turns out of Virginia, by those who promoted sterilization. They thought they were losing badly in the states and they had to fight 50 battles. So maybe they could win one that would rule them all. And they took that to the Supreme Court of the United States, where Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of our most famous jurists, wrote an opinion saying, among other things,